Right now, the United States Supreme Court is probably going to overturn Roe versus Wade, making abortion illegal in much of the country. And the reason for this is that the Christian right, Christian fundamentalism, conservative, and evangelical Christians in the United States views abortion as genocide. So I want to talk about their religious view, and essentially what's happening is that people are trying to legislate their rather extreme religious beliefs in the United States. And this has huge consequences for our current political situation. So, this is a huge issue for many conservative Christians. In many churches, Christian leaders teach their congregants to vote or not vote for politicians solely based on how they view the issue of abortion. Many of them teach that abortion is the single most important issue. I mean, forget all that stuff that Jesus said about taking care of the poor, all these very high biblical values about justice and righteousness and equality. This issue of abortion, they view as a genocide, that millions of babies, they say, are being murdered. Millions of innocent lives, unborn children who can't protect themselves, are being slaughtered. And because of this, God is really angry. God is getting really pissed off. He's angry as hell. And they teach that there could be a national invasion by a foreign country. We could be exiled or deported or killed in a war because God's wrath is coming. And this is based on the reading of the issue of abortion into the Bible. The Bible nowhere references abortion, even though I'm sure that abortions were being practiced in Old and New Testament times. The Bible never sees, the biblical authors never see it as such a big issue that they have to write about it. You would think that God would be judging people for it back then, but I guess not. So anyway, they read this issue into specific biblical texts, and they have in mind a lot of passages in the Old Testament. A lot of the Old Testament is prophets warning the Israelites that God is about to judge them, that God's wrath is coming, mainly because they're being unfaithful to God. They're worshiping other gods and participating in practices of other religions. But some of the practices that God pronounces judgment on the Israelites for are lots of violence, a rampant moral degeneracy, and the shedding of innocent blood, and lots of bloodshed. And there's a verse in 2 Kings chapter 17. It is talking about the different practices of the Israelites and how they're going after other gods. And it says that they caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire in worshiping other gods. So this is a reference to child sacrifice, that God's saying God judged these people, the Israelites, because they were taking part in child sacrifice, which, by the way, probably the Israelites at some point in the Judeo-Christian religious lineage involved child sacrifice. I mean, Jesus' death was basically a child sacrifice in a lot of their views, that God sacrificed his son, right? We won't go into that here. That's no problem. But so they're portraying abortion as child sacrifice. And many preachers are saying that what's happening here is that we're sacrificing our children on a mass scale, and that this is basically fueling the worship of demons, of evil demonic beings, and this great evil spiritual force is being provoked, and it's pissing God off, and God's going to judge us. So there's this demon worship happening through child sacrifice that we're unconsciously doing, and that it's also a genocide, that we're just committing many, many murders, the shedding of innocent blood, and the biblical punishment for this could be exile, could be war, could be foreign invasion. So all this hysteria, all this hype is happening. I mean, people, you should see the preaching around the issue of abortion. It's craziness. Like, they really think that apocalyptic wrath is coming. And that's why they're so up in arms about making abortion illegal. For them, it really is a life and death issue on this mass scale, not just on the fetus itself, but on their lives, on all of our lives, on the integrity of our nation, based on this reading into the Bible of the issue of abortion, which it's not actually addressing here. So there's no ban on abortion in the Bible. And actually, if you want to talk about the sanctity of life in the Bible, you want to know how the Bible actually views children. It views them as property item of men. Women and children are the property of men in the Bible. You know, that's some high view of the sanctity of life, isn't it? Property. So the Bible says in the 10 Commandments, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female slave, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So what belongs to him? His wife. His wife is his property. That's a really high valuing of women, isn't it? And there's one passage in the Bible in particular that kind of comes close to talking about abortion, and it doesn't end up on the side of the fundamentalists, by the way. It actually ends up being more of a pro-choice kind of verse. And it talks about miscarriage, not abortion. So this is Exodus 21:22-25. It says, if people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman and she has a miscarriage, but there's no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. Okay, so here the fetus is viewed as the property of the man, and the punishment for the miscarriage is property damages. There's damages to his finances, his financial situation, essentially. And so then the passage continues to say, but if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Okay, that's intense. So it says here, actually, that the death penalty is fully in view. They had no problem with death penalty in the Old Testament. So if they viewed this unborn fetus as a life, the death penalty would have been on the line. The person who hit the woman and caused the miscarriage would have been killed. But they actually say that's not the case. This verse says the death penalty is in view. It says the death penalty should be applied if the woman is seriously injured. So they're actually viewing the woman as her life as being more important than the fetus, which is really kind of viewed as property damage. If the fetus doesn't live, it's not, the death penalty would be applied if they view this as a murder, and they make that very clear. But they value the woman's life more than the fetus, which is interesting because that's kind of like pro-choice, right? And part of the reason, one of the primary reasons that abortion is legal is to protect the bodily autonomy and the choice of women. And the bans that are going to go into effect in many cases have no provisions for rape or incest, or if the woman's life is endangered by pregnancy, which happens quite frequently. So this biblical verse here about miscarriage doesn't really help their position much. But I mean, they're not that concerned with even the consistency of the Bible, which, I mean, the Bible doesn't specifically reference this issue, so it doesn't have it in mind. But it and the sanctity of life in the Bible, I mean, not necessarily a high value, not the place I would necessarily go if I wanted to look to uphold life. I mean, there's all kinds of brutality in the Bible, and you want to talk about genocide and a double standard? You know, genocide's all good if God commands it. I mean, in the Old Testament, God commands his people to genocide the people who are living in the land of Israel and Canaan. He says, go kill all of them, every living thing, including children. And it's all good when God commands it. And in the beliefs of the Christian right, of most evangelical Christians, they believe that Jesus is going to come back in the second coming and slaughter most of the earth. There's going to be this massive bloodbath. God's going to destroy most of nature and kill most unbelievers because they don't worship him. So talk about genocide. I mean, who's the one who's in favor of genocide here? It's really this wrathful deity. So at least be consistent, you know? I mean, I think maybe you might be good with genocide. I mean, why not be pro-choice? I'm just kidding. I don't view it as genocide. But if you want to talk about the sanctity of life, then examine your own Bible and you know, really, let's be honest here. You don't view life as that sacred in a lot of your own texts. So, but I mean, that's not something that most people are willing to admit. So they will read abortion into some specific verses and use them as proof texts for their arguments. And again, none of these Bible verses are talking about abortion specifically. So I'm going to read three of the big ones. One of them is Jeremiah 1:5. God says to Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you, I appointed you a prophet to the nations." So God is talking about God's foreknowledge, God's predestining of Jeremiah. Is not making a medical or scientific statement on the personhood of Jeremiah while he was in the womb. He was saying that he predetermined him. He had a plan for him even before he was born, and he fashioned him in the womb. And so, you know, the issue here isn't even an issue of when life begins. A lot of people would agree that life, you know, begins at conception. But the question is, when should we grant people legal and ethical personhood? When do we grant people the status of personhood? So it's actually a fairly complex and nuanced issue. And, you know, a lot of people don't view a miscarriage as a death. And a lot of people who have these beliefs about abortion, you know, miscarriages are really common, actually, medically. A lot of times people have miscarriages without even being aware of it, just that there's conception, and then for whatever reason it dies or it doesn't take, and people aren't even aware that they were pregnant. So is that a death every time that happens? Or I mean, certain forms of birth control, again, it gets very nuanced and complex. And at what point does the life of the woman matter? And if she doesn't want to have a child and she's born in poverty, you know, it's not great for society when people who are too poor to have children, and we don't have childcare, and they don't want the child, have the child anyway. You know, it's not that great for the child. So there are a lot of complexities here. And again, like rape and incest, but none of these complexities are being taken into account. And I mean, essentially what's happening here is prohibition with abortion. How has prohibition worked before in the United States? You know, this isn't the first time they've used prohibition as a religious legislative policy. It happened with alcohol, right? And do you really think that just because you make abortion illegal that people are going to stop having them in the modern world when people are used to abortion being legal in the United States? And it will still be legal in many states, and it'll still be legal in many parts of the world. You know, many people are still going to get abortions, even when you make it illegal. It's just now they're going to do it illegally and dangerously and without proper medical care. And people are going to die, and bad things are going to happen. Real harm's going to happen as a result. So even if you believe that this should be law, you know, it's not an effective way. So I'm going to go over two more verses. Psalm 139. This is ascribed to David, and he's saying, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made." So he's saying that God made him in his mother's womb. You know, not a very contentious statement to make from a Christian point of view. I mean, even from a scientific view, you'd say, yeah, people were formed in our mother's womb, right? That's true. So what? Again, that doesn't address the issue of abortion and personhood and the complexities involved. It's really David's making a statement about awe and wonder about God, and it's not a scientific or medical statement. And we don't know what he would say about abortion if he was, he might have a different take. And so then Luke 1:41 says, when Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the child leapt in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. So Jesus' mother, when Mary meets Elizabeth, Jesus, the unborn fetus, leaps in her womb. So that's supposed to be a proof that abortion is murder, because Jesus was alive and seen as a child or living in her womb. Again, it's an extrapolation. It's not clear. It doesn't have the issue in mind. And Christians of many different persuasions read all of these texts and still will support abortion as valid, and will take a different view on when personhood comes about than this. So it's really, abortion is not even clear in the Bible, and there are so many inconsistencies in this worldview when it comes to the value of human life. And again, these people are not advocating for robust child services or for childcare or for health care. They oppose all of them. And, God's judgment actually comes on God's people for devaluing social justice, for not taking care of the poor in a lot of the Bible. So this is a very extremist religious view that's not even consistent with a lot of things in their own texts, because these ideologies come from people who are often not taught to think critically, and there's a high value placed on submission to a divine text as authoritative and the interpretation of their leaders of that text. So my hope is that we gain some more awareness of the potential damage of a lot of these religious views. And, they also talk about the Constitution being an issue here, on our constitutional rights. The framers of the Constitution didn't want religion to be legislated, and that's precisely what they're trying to do. So my name is Andrew Jasko. I'm the founder of Life After Dogma. I work with people to help them heal from harmful religious experiences, from the psychological, spiritual, and communal damage that can come from being in a controlling religion like evangelical Christianity, or like a lot of evangelical Christianity. So if you are interested in having a coaching session with me, the link is below. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe.